Welcome back. You're with Power Lunch here on NDTV Profit. And our focus today is on analyzing the tax plan, the tax rate structure that the government, in consultation with, state finance ministers, what is referred to as the GST Council, has arrived at. I'm pleased to welcome Mahesh Jaising, partner at BMR and Associates, to really analyze the implications of yesterday's announcement. Mahesh, good afternoon. Always a pleasure to have you here on NDTV Profit. So the rate structure is in place. What do you make of it?
Good afternoon, Manvi. I think, yes, the rate structure is indeed the hot topic of the day. If you look at the rate structure, what was expected by industry right until a couple of weeks ago was for product companies to have just 4 slabs, a 0%, a 12%, 18%, and then a 40% for luxury goods. This was based on the Chief Economic Advisor's report. But what has emerged is 2 additional rate bands, one being a 5% rate band and another being a 28% rate band. So while the 5% one is clearly welcome because there are products today that have an excise which is exempt and a VAT that is 5%, like pharma, life-saving drugs, it's good for those products because then the price point can by and large be the same and the GST shouldn't come in and create some pricing pressures there. But what's come in as a surprise, I would say, for industry is the 28% ban, Manvi.
Okay, so, the 28% ban has come through as a surprise. Also philosophically, people are arguing that having extra bans, in a sense, goes against the idea and the concept of GST. What's the feedback you're getting?
Absolutely. I think the first feedback that we're getting is that, having multiple rate structures and different, schedules for these rates is bound to lead to some classification disputes. So if what we were looking for is a simple GST regime where classification disputes should ideally be a thing of the past, the fear and apprehension now is with the 40% band as well. Effectively, we're looking at 6 slabs, and therefore we're going to be looking at classification issues going forward. But what is worrying industry more than the classification dispute is industry in particularly products that had an excise duty rate of 12.5% and 14% VAT, and the 12.5% being applied on the factory price, which is typically about 70–80%, which had a loaded cost of about 23 to 24%. They were looking forward to GST, saying that, look, we're going to have an 18% rate. Finally, we're going to be done away with cascading effect of taxes. Finally, we can rationalize our pricing. But now the ambiguity that's been brought about is that the government is going to be carving out these products which are under the normal rate of excise and VAT to 2 lists, one being the 18% list and the other the 28% list. So the industry has been taken by surprise because they were already doing their pricing analysis and impact, but it's not a pleasant surprise, I would say, with the 28% ban coming in, and they're watching the space closely as to what would be in this list of 28 is the next big question that remains unanswered for now.
And, correct me if I've got it wrong, but the technical committee is going to do that allocation, right, into rate categories?
That's right, and there is some level of guidance that has been provided that white goods would be under the 28% list, probably smaller cars may be under this list, but I think it gets a little blur when we get into what is mass consumption product or what is the products that would be for the middleman and therefore that, the middle class, and which would be therefore under the 18% bracket, and what would go under the 28, because one can't really scientifically and clearly bring out that demarcation. But I think that committee and that group has a tall task ahead of them to be able to bifurcate and to probably keep this 28% list as short as possible. But if that doesn't happen, we will be having some complications in the few days to come on the GST front.
Okay, I'm just going to take a step back and ask a couple of larger questions. Mr. Jaitley talking about how this rate structure had 2 goals, in a sense, guiding it. One is minimize inflation and the other is protect the revenues of the government. Broadly speaking, and I know it's a slightly unfair question to put to you, but broadly speaking, does this rate structure sort of move towards that?
I think in terms of protecting the revenue, it certainly does. But in terms of it not being inflationary, I have my reservations on the products that go under the 28% category, because the 28% number is not necessarily reflective of the fully loaded tax on what they're referring to as white goods right now. The effective rate is close to 24 to 25%. So I in fact see the 28% being counter to that second objective of it not being inflationary, and we would need to watch this a little carefully. So yes, the products that are under the 5%, 12 and 18 by and large should not be inflationary, but my worry continues to be on this 28% category of goods, Manvi.
And then there's the cess as well, right, to consider, and how that shapes up.
That's right, and I think if you look at it, they talked about cess being for these luxury products, and therefore there will be, instead of calling it out to be 40, and mind you, 40 is not the number that was mentioned yesterday, so it's still unclear what this amount of cess would be, and whether that cess would be plus 12 or whether it will be something else. And again, what are luxury goods? Is it only going to be luxury cars, or are they going to expand it to luxury other goods as well, is something that we are looking out for. And I think what worries industry, and particularly multinationals, companies and large companies having these IT systems, that they thought that at least under GST we will just have one line item of GST being mentioned. But it looks like again we're going to be going back to having cesses to be mentioned, cesses to be reported, probably cess credit kitties. So I think it's more than just having this as a cess and the financial impact. It will have some implementation issues, to say the least.
Actually, that's an important aspect. Where does this, Mahesh, now bring us in terms of expectations of meeting, the April 2017 deadline? We were combing through the views of various brokerage firms, and I have to say that the majority view seemed to suggest that, look, now that you've got the rate structure in place, whether or not it's palatable is a separate matter, but the possibility or probability of meeting the April deadline has increased. I mean, what's your own assessment of it?
Yes, indeed. I think rate is an important hurdle more rather than from a legislative perspective, but to get the states and center all on board, which I think that consensus building is important. And now all eyes on the winter session of Parliament. The GST bill is expected to be placed in the winter session, which is in a couple of weeks from now, and expected to be passed by during the session that ends mid of December. So what's the probability? My sense is that April is looking stronger. I would still attribute a 60-40, saying 60 to 65% chance for April, and probably a few months which the government may choose to give after the legislative process is complete, pushing it back not more than July is my assessment for now.
But, I understand that today, the discussions today for the GST Council are likely to be, more heated on this whole sharing of administrative powers. Is that the view you'd take, the adjective you'd use?
Absolutely. So that's really the elephant in the room as far as the biggest item that is pending in terms of a consensus. Rate is the one that now they have behind them, but sharing of the administrative control, and particularly because it's a dual levy and one will be assessed technically by the central and the state authorities. Do they do the assessments twice over? What is the appellate remedy? These are things that is the only part that there's a fair level of ambiguity still, though I don't think that will stall the process of the legislative process as to what has been chalked out to go into the winter session of Parliament, because some of the administrative part can come out in the rules and the guidelines. But nevertheless, you are bang on in saying that this sharing of administrative powers is indeed the biggest left hurdle in this process for GST.
Now, Mahesh, I know you don't like to, move into the realm of speculation, but I do need to ask this question at this stage, which is sort of circling back to everything that we've just discussed. If you had to categorize the sectors that have come out, in a sense, ahead, given the rate structure that was revealed yesterday, and the sectors that are actually in the sort of ambivalent / negatively hit category, how would you split that list up?
Sure. I think one part which I've not necessarily mentioned is the services sector. And let's remind ourselves that services today gets taxed at 15%. So with the services sector expected to move to 18%, while yesterday's announcements per se don't change much of that, that continues to be a bit of a thumbs down, so to speak, on as far as services are concerned. But what services sector is interested and looking forward to seeing is what would come out in terms of essential services that would attract 12%. Insurance is one of them that is expecting that. So if that happens, at least insurance should have a thumbs up. But in terms of the goods, I would say pharma products, life-saving drugs, it's come in the 5% rate that has come in now. Seems to be they seem to be a beneficiary of it, because at least they'll not get worse off. So when I say beneficiary, it's not that they'll be better off, but it's just that they won't be worse off. The products that will be indeed worse off, and the thumbs down would be for the white good products, where the expectation was a rate of 18% until just this meeting of yesterday, and now they need to be looking at their pricing and their the entire costing, etc. when the needle moves to 28. Smaller cars as well was expecting an 18% rate, so we were expecting that smaller cars should become cheaper under GST. I don't know the final list of 28. Again, it's a bit of guesswork, but my sense is 28 may cover these cars, and therefore then what is a thumbs down is for sectors like white goods and cars, motorcycles as well. So again, it will depend on these final lists, but these are a few sectors that came on top of my mind that I thought I should share.
Okay, and again, a slightly unfair question, but just give us a glimpse into, the kind of issues that, say, the white good manufacturers who were thinking 18% is what they have to work with. When you say they have to go back, look at their pricing again, look at their strategy again, what is the kind of upheaval that a potential move from 18 to 28 throws out for them? Just a sample, no names.
Sure. So if I just take a refrigerator manufacturer, and the price point of a refrigerator was 100,000 rupees, and they were and it has an inbuilt set of taxes, which today my guess is it's close to about 24 to 25%. They were looking at 18% being the new rate, and therefore probably looking at reducing prices for customers like each one of us. And also re-looking at what sort of credit efficiencies are brought in through the distributors and others. Now when the needle moves up to 28, they need to see, because pricing in the real world is not so clinical that there's a cost, a profit, and then a tax thereon. It is market driven. There's a particular landed price, and they work backwards. And the brands are what takes, the brands are usually take the hit of an increase in a tax rate. So I think that they would now need to relook at from what they were looking at as GST being an opportunity probably to reduce prices, where there's pressure for them to probably increase or nudge the price up a little bit, or for them to take a hit on their, on their bottom line. So I can tell you that from since the announcements yesterday, many of the management of many of these companies are indeed highly concerned, having teams relook and doing the simulations on costing and pricing.
That was a very interesting example, very illustrative. Mahesh Jaising, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for the clarity that you bring to all of these conversations. Good talking to you today.
Likewise, thank you.
We're taking a very quick break. We'll be back in a moment, and we're going to revisit some of the pharma names, the fact that they're under pressure. So what do you expect it to do if you're an investor in these stocks? Also, there's been some movement in the auto majors based on a plea made by the government to the Green Tribunal. That and more after the break.